WLRN Video presents.
Hi, and welcome to WLRN, listener-sponsored feminist radio. I'm Thistle Pettersen. It was my great privilege and honor to interview Jo Brew, host of Feminist Question Time and a totally excellent radical feminist, last week. I contacted Jo after the Women's Human Rights Campaign, or WHRC, sent out a press release announcing that members of their organization had been barred participation in and their materials removed from the online arena they had spent $1,500 to be part of. I wanted to talk with Jo to get her unique perspective as one of the founding members of WHRC on what happened at the online Committee on the Status of Women event, its significance, but I also wanted to get to know her a bit better and her story of how she came to be a radical feminist. I hope you enjoy the conversation we had and that you'll stay tuned to WLRN, the original turf radio in our femisphere. Well, welcome to WLRN, Jo Brew of WHRC, the international organization and also the UK organization. Thank you so much for coming onto our airwaves and speaking with me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So why don't we just dive right into who you are? I'm really curious, how did you discover radical feminism? What it means to you and what kind of activism you're engaged in?
Well, when I was young, I had two sisters and I mostly went to a girls' school. And I think that it was very important having those females around. And I I suppose I felt like a full human being for most of the time. And it then I noticed that I've noticed very young that there were some sex stereotypes, but much of the time it didn't really get in the way, and I managed to just keep on doing what I wanted to. But the more I engaged with males and saw their opportunities, the more I noticed they were treated better than us. And I also noticed they were very cruel. And they were irrational. Like if I explained what I was thinking or how how things affected me or females, that was just incomprehensible to them. They couldn't get it, and it was a really, really weird. I sort of thought, well, that's so strange because they seem to be able to understand maths or history, things outside things that don't affect feminism, that don't impact feminism, but they just absolutely couldn't understand it. So that was a massive mystery to me. Then at university, I became the women's officer for my sort of section for and I remember we had a massive argument in our college. A I was at Cambridge University and I was at Christ's College, and there was a massive argument because I found out that the men's rugby team got £87,000 a year to look after their tractor and their piece of turf. And then I worked out how much the women got for our things, which were basically nothing. Like we didn't really have any clubs, but we did participate in, well, almost nothing. And we did some sport, but we did sports that didn't really cost anything, and most of the women didn't do any sport. So we worked it out, and we were getting about £3,000 a year. So I said, why don't we do this? Why don't we give half the money, because the government are giving the funding for our studies. It was free in those days. So why don't we get half the money, we the women, and then we can choose what we want to do with that money, like have parties or spend it on holidays or whatever, buy cars. I don't know what we wanted to do, just something. And then the men can have half the money. It's just completely not fair that they got about 90% of the funds went to their thing that they wanted to do. And it was just so interesting how livid the men were, and they all got all their friends to come, and some of the women as well. But we actually did get lots of people supporting us, including some of the men, and it was just brilliant. I loved it. I sort of loved like this massive injustice, financial injustice. So I got into that,
And in
and
the end,
yeah,
did you get some of that money?
no, we
Wow.
didn't. We didn't get any of the money, but I did learn a lot.
Hmm.
And then when I left university, most people I know went to work in the City of London or something, or to be just make loads of money. And instead of that, I went to live in a squat, and I set up a feminist magazine called Shocking Pink, and with a collective. So we were a collective of young women lesbians, and very left wing, most of us, and we sold 5,000 copies of every issue. This was in about
Shockingly pink.
Shocking Pink, it was called.
Shocking pink.
Yeah, 1987. It was good. It was really good, and it was very funny as well. And then there were some really interesting experiences because one thing, The Guardian, which is a big left wing British paper, they said that they took lots of photos of us, and they said, "Oh, you're so exciting, young feminists, young lesbians. We want to do a big spread on you, and that will get us maybe sell more and develop our network." And on the front cover of that issue, we had an issue which was about violence by women. So we were investigating, at times women were violent, like say in terms of self-defense, or sometimes they participated in revolutionary struggle. And we had a picture of an old woman throwing a cobblestone in the Paris 68 riots. And the Guardian said, "Oh, will you send over your front cover?" And we said, "Yes." Okay, so we sent it, and they said, "We don't want you to mention this issue." And we said, "Well, it's really interesting, violence by women, because it's a sex stereotype that women are passive and we can't ever fight back." And they said, "No, that's very contentious. We don't want you to do that. Either you change your front cover, or we're not going to run our positive article on you." And so we did not change our front cover, and they never gave us that publicity.
Oh. Do you
I
regret
mean,
that decision?
no, not at all.
No.
I think it's fantastic. It's like silencing. They are trying to silence us and
But
make.
but your followers, could have found that cover had they heard of you. I mean, that's what a platform like The Guardian can do for a small collective that needs to break through that sound barrier, that censorship.
No, I
Didn't
don't
consider
agree with
that.
that. No, I don't think so. I think that I think that it's just completely really bad letting your these gatekeepers ruin your politics. Um, and then the other thing that happened that made me more radical and understand politics more is uh, we got some advertising, people who paid for advertising, and because we were quite successful, there was a lager company, that's beer. They said that they would pay quite a lot, like maybe £1,000, or which would have been quite significant to us, every edition to have a full page ad. And we did that once. And then some of the women in the lesbian community, or well, in fact, one particularly said, "I don't think you should do that because loads of lesbians have problems with drinking too much alcohol, and alcohol's really bad." And so that made me really spend a lot of time thinking about what we're doing as feminists. And I sort of think it's like Virginia Woolf said, we're trying to put together the broken pieces, and we're not trying to split people and promote things like alcoholism. So we stopped taking the lager advertising. And so I learned a lot about feminism really then, um, about what we're doing and what problems there are with trying to break through into mainstream and stuff like that.
Yeah, and what a topic that leads us to what happened just recently on an international level, where you could argue it's a type of censorship, took place at this gathering. I forget the name of it. It's an NGO gathering that happens. Can you tell us a little bit about that gathering, what it's called, and who runs
Right.
it?
So are you talking about the United Nations NGO? meeting that happens every March.
Okay, of the CSW,
Yes. Is
right.
that,
Yes,
yeah,
that's what I'm talking about, and the March 26th incident and how it's related to this trying to break through the sound barrier and into the mainstream and the problems with that, and then also not compromising your values. Like your collective
yeah,
in 1987 did not compromise your values in order to get this platform into the mainstream to kind of try to
yeah,
lure
yeah,
people in somehow. I mean, it's extremely problematic, and it seems like 1987, 2021, we still have this problem. And you're in this high level feminist organization. I say high level because it's international. Sheila Jeffreys was one of the main authors of the declaration, and the work you've done in the last 2 years, or is it, yeah, I think it's about only like
yeah,
2 years, is amazing. Like live radio type programs where women can interact with each other globally
yeah,
once a
yeah,
week. that
yeah,
that's such a service to our movement, and yet
yeah,
we find that we're still in this bubble. Like that's what I feel like the March 26th story is about, is that they can still sweep us out, and we still kind of are talking to each other. And how do we get people like the UN people to hear what we're saying, you know?
yeah. I mean, it's difficult. Well, I just want to tell you a couple of other things that I did to make me a radical feminist.
Okay,
Um, is
circle back. Sounds good.
I I worked for an organization called the European Forum of Left Feminists. I edited their newsletter for about 4 years, and that was a network of feminists and academics, and they were left wing and feminist, and it was European, and they dealt with a range of really interesting issues. And at that time, that was in the early 90s, there was a lot of really good work going on in academia. So a lot of the academics were very good, but I could see I was more radical than most of them, many of them. I then worked as a lobbyist for a network of development feminists, which was called WIDE, and it was Women in Development Europe, and it was about uh, trade policy, world trade policy. So the IMF and the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and it was about how world trade rules should be. And we were lobbying using the ideas of feminist economics, which um, uh, are basically, saying women's unpaid labor isn't represented. And if you make decisions that don't include women and don't include what women do, it's not going to help. But we use the Beijing Platform for Action to lobby the European Commission, mostly all the European institutions, but also sort of impact a bit on the UN. So I had a really big sort of insight into how sort of theoretical issues like trade policy can impact women's rights. So I did that in the 90s, and that then made me more radical because a lot of the women in the network were sort of liberal feminists and they wanted to make things a little bit better, but they weren't nearly as radical as I was. And then I think the big thing was reading Mary Daly. So I just remember reading Mary Daly and thinking, yeah, this is very good. I like this. So that's the big thing. And I guess loads of women reading, and then I think what made me also a radical feminist was reading all Sheila Jeffreys stuff, because Mary Daly stopped writing. I mean, I think her best things were Gynecology and Pure Lust, and then after that there was good stuff. It is good, but for me it wasn't, and there weren't any major helpful amazing bits, although it was lovely. But the Sheila Jeffreys stuff I've sort of read all of, and it's incredibly practical and adds so much and is just so brilliant. And so that's how I became a radical feminist, that like goes. So I actually haven't read some of the other famous radical
Mhm.
feminists really so much.
Were you Backing up a little bit to your time at the university, what did you study? Was it something like international relations? I think you mentioned it.
I studied geography, but in geography, you can do economic geography. So I did development economics, really, sort of development
Wow,
and geography. So it's like
fascinating.
economic geography, mostly all human stuff. But it was about sort of how countries treat each other and how trade policy is,
Hmm.
which is so linked up to feminism because the way bully countries treat weaker countries is just such a strong analogy to feminism.
Right. And um, during that time, we're in the 1990s when you were working for that organization. I can't remember the name of it. Was that a paid position, or have you always been a volunteer doing this work?
No, it's paid. So the wide development policy thing was paid. Before that, my paid job was being a researcher in the European Parliament for a couple of Labour politicians, one who worked on development policy and one who worked on trade policy. So those were like I helped them with their work in relation to those trade and development.
Interesting.
And then I moved for this, and then this was paid mostly by the Dutch government, who were into development policy and feminism. I mean, it wasn't
Really?
perfect.
And feminism. So your feminist analysis was welcomed at your place of paid employment, and you were working on development policy.
Yes and no. It was, only I was more radical than them because
Okay.
they were a little bit, I think they could see some of the contradictions and they wanted to say, look, there's a contradiction. But, of course, I want to overthrow the whole thing, the patriarchy and capitalism. And they were much more like, let's just tweak around the edges.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it was very good what we were doing. We were using the Beijing platform for action and saying, implement it. So you can go a long way with that. But then I suppose what they understood, the other women hadn't really read much feminism, and the yeah. So it's a bit limited, but it was good.
Yeah, and I mean, there are all these different kinds of feminism. I mean, do you believe that liberal feminism is a type of feminism, or do you think that liberal feminism is in service to the patriarchy, so we can't really even call it feminism? Like this group, the CSW, the Committee on, what is it called
The
again?
status of women.
The
Yeah.
Committee on the Status of Women, they call themselves feminist, but yet they're kicking out feminists. And so, I mean, I'd be curious to hear what you think about that term feminism and how people call themselves feminists and yet they're not really feminists.
Well, I mean, at the moment, men can call themselves women. So if a man can call himself a woman and self-identify, anybody can say they're a feminist and then define what feminism is. So, um, I think that you need to ask people what their definition is, and you, I think radical feminism, I would say, I would say that, say, the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights has some very, very clear uh, sort of standpoints and analyses that you can stand up to, that stand the test of time and make sense, and a clear articulation of radical feminism in Sheila Jeffrey's books. I would say that analysis is a helpful form of feminism, and that, generally there are loads of radical feminists who come up with, I would say, end up having good analyses. But I mean, I think that liberal feminists, um, sometimes they can be quite helpful because they want certain bits of progress for women, and sometimes they'll make compromises or think that you don't want to go too far. So it's their sort of strategic plan. Um, I would disagree with. I mean, I would generally say it's better if people think they're a feminist than not. So if they're a liberal feminist, it's probably better than if they say they're sexist. So,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't. I would then sort of say, well, that's interesting. Let's talk about what you actually believe. And sometimes I wouldn't agree with it. Yeah.
Interesting. So, can we move on to talking about what just happened? That the WHRC sent out a press release. I responded to that. What's the significance of it? Set the stage for us first. Like, what is this organization? Who were those 25,000 people? Is it the same 25,000 that come year after year every March? How does it function in the world scene in terms of power? And how did WHRC get a seat at the table? And then, basically you were kicked out. So,
Yeah. So, Women's Human Rights Campaign is a feminist organization, and we wrote that. Well, I didn't write much of it. Helped get it written, but it was written by women in the Women's Human Rights Campaign, a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which uses the UN convention on the CEDAW, which is the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, 1979. So it uses that as the basis of our political struggle, and it says the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women has been signed, I think it's by 187 states globally. So it's pretty much everybody in the world has signed it. And all the states have ratified it, apart from actually the United States, who have not ratified it or signed it. But most of the countries in the world agree with women's human rights. And women's human rights are specific, like they're additional to some of the men's human rights based on our biology. So men don't need protection during pregnancy because then they don't get pregnant. And they don't need maternity benefit. They don't need protection of sexual violence of men against women. And there are a range of things like FGM, um, discrimination against women simply because they're women, and then sex role stereotypes. One of the ways that women get exploited is that women get pressurized into believing that they're inferior and also doing certain jobs like the cleaning up or whatever, being kind.
secretary. Mhm.
Yeah, so our the Women's Human Rights Campaign uses this international convention because that's been signed by states all over the world, because it's a globally recognized um, women's rights document, and it's the strongest bit of international um, commitment that we have at the moment. And it's universally known all over the world. So women, let's say if you talk to somebody in Nigeria about CEDAW, they know about it. Whereas if you talk to them about loads of things, they won't really know about it. They know about the United Nations, and women have mobilized and used the United Nations documents and the commitments to gain rights. And it's also like an international language, a legislative language that we can use. So the United Nations has done lots of really good stuff. What we're saying is we really agree with CEDAW and we agree with the good work that the United Nations has done. But there's going to be a problem if they redefine the word woman from sex. And so the United Nations glossary, the gender equality glossary from the UN Women, says sex is defined by the United Nations as the physical and biological characteristics that distinguish males from females. So it's very clear. And they also say that gender is sex role stereotypes and they should be eliminated. So this is coming. We've taken the UN's words themselves.
And
That's
that was from the year 1976 or something like that. Do you
No, the
remember?
gender equality glossary was from last year, from a couple of years.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So, well, it is awesome, but we just recently heard that they're upgrading their glossary, and it's all disappeared. So we've got downloaded versions of the glossary that it used to be, but the UN are working on upgrading their glossary, and at the moment, as far as I know, they haven't got a definition of sex or gender yet. So there could very well be linguistic slippage coming up. But what our argument is if you change the definition of the word woman from being biological to be based on gender identity, a load of the rights that women have worked for go.
We interrupt this WLRN extended interview to bring you a very important advertisement from WLRN's founding member, Thistle Pettersen.
I'm here today to lift my WLRN 5-year anniversary pint glass to all of you, our listeners, supporters, volunteers, collective members, past and present. The design on this glass is by Casey Walker, and there is a limited number available. So order yours today.
And now, back to the show.
And disappear. So we wrote the declaration, which has got 9 articles. We've been promoting it. We've got 16,500 signatories from 131 countries. 327 organizations are supporting it. We've got a lot of activists, and we decided to go to this big UN meeting in March. And what we would do is we would intervene or in meetings and try to promote our concerns, because presumably so this UN meeting is a meeting, this year it was online. It's normally in New York. Normally about 7,000 people go, and they're people from NGOs, that's non-governmental organizations like charities, voluntary organizations. They go and they talk about the worries that they have about women's rights. And it's at the same time as the member states, the states of the United Nations, like the government of UK or France or Burundi, they're meeting in New York at the same time. This year it was all virtual. But so the governmental organizations and the UN institutions are meeting to work out what they should do on women's rights. And in order to get civil society people involved, they also invite NGOs and charities and voluntary organizations to come along and debate. And it's sort of serious, because they need to share the vision of the United Nations with the grassroots. So we're sort of part of the grassroots. And we went along to the meeting this year and we shared our concerns, and we had a webinar which was successful, and we had a lot of attendees. But what happened is, right at the end of the NGO CSW meeting, some of our attendees, some of our activists were at a meeting, and what happened is they were posting a link to our website, suggesting that the attendees could go and have a look at our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, and they were all deleted, so they were sort of dismissed from the meeting. And then I wasn't there at the meeting, but was the rep who organized our organization platform, and we had paid $1,500 to have what's called an exhibit booth and a handbook ad. So the handbook ad is an advert about our organization, and the exhibit booth was a sort of like a trade stand, where it was like a Zoom meeting that went on constantly 24/7 for about 2 weeks. So we had been there talking to people and running small little workshops and chats about women's rights and our worry about gender identity replacing women, the biological women, and the concerns about that. Anyway, we got a letter saying that I had disrupted meetings, sustained disruption of a meeting, and I'd made offensive comments related to gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, some of these things possibly, disability, mental illness, physical appearance, political affiliation, age, race, national or ethnic origin, immigration status, language, religion, or indigeneity. I wasn't at any meetings and I never said anything.
And
So
who did that message come from,
it
and who
came
was
from
it to?
the online safety. It came from a thing called online safety, which was
No,
from
no signature, no person signed it.
no, it said it was no, it was from the NGO CSW New York. So the this big meeting was organized by an organization called NGO CSW New York, who are a voluntary organization, and they provide, it's like they would organize how we could all get together. So they're a sort of um a forum, and they organize, they always make a program, and they encourage civil society women to participate, and they run some events, and they host some events. So they're like the introduction people who run this big meeting place that normally happens in New York. They were doing it online, and what they did is they removed our organizational Women's Human Rights Campaign handbook ad and our exhibit booth. And the problem with that is that this we'd paid $1,500, and we were there during the meeting until they removed us. But they're now going to keep this platform up, this online thing, for a year. But we've been removed, so it's effectively silencing us. Well, it is silencing us for
But
a year.
you were at that virtual like exhibition place where people could come to you and talk to you in an online
Yeah,
24/7 Zoom for 2 weeks before they pulled
yeah,
that. Was
yeah.
that the amount of time that all the other orgs had too, or did they get longer?
Well, everybody else has got the 2 weeks, and now they've got a year. And we've had 2 weeks, and now we've been
And now
uh,
you don't get
deleted.
that whole year, and
Yeah,
because you've been pulled because you
yeah.
supposedly went to a meeting and were disruptive, and there's no contact person for you to speak to about
No,
this.
there is a contact person. So I've sent a letter to them saying, um, "Dear NGO CSW, I can't see how I can have done any of these things because I didn't go to any meetings and I didn't say anything. Apart from I did right at the beginning, and I said something like, 'This is a wonderful event. I can't wait to go to more
Yeah,
superb meetings,' something really schmoozy like that.
right.
They then they've written back to me, and they've said, yes, yeah, we did not. Well, I'm just going to get what they said to me. They said, yes, you're right. We did not actually remove you, because um we agree we didn't remove you because I hadn't done anything. They said there were 5 of our activists, and um, they've named them, and they've said they were removed for incessant chat messages with the WHRC declaration during the rally. Even after we requested all participants to stop posting it in the chat. And they messages were very distracting and disrupting to the event. And what we've asked is for them to give evidence that we did that these 5 actually did incessant chat messages, because what we understand is they didn't do that. And so basically it's a bit unfair of them to accuse us of incessant chat messages, when we refute that. And I've sent a message saying, please, what do you know, could you send us evidence of this? Because and they haven't responded.
Well, it's
So
interesting because today is April 18th, and this incident, you were pulled and scolded on March 26th. So it's kind of taking a while to resolve this. Do you think more than just the contact person that you're talking to is involved? Do you think who's talking about this? Are higher ups talking about it, or is it just a minor inconvenience and a misunderstanding, or what is your take on what's, the political implications, I guess, of what this is?
Well, I hope it's a minor inconvenience and that the NGO CSW meeting just realised that they made an error, that there wasn't incessant chat. I think if there was incessant chat, they should send us some evidence of it, because it seems a bit much. Because our women's human rights campaign, women say they maybe put our declaration in once, and I think it's a bit much to not be allowed to post about your own organization in the chat
Right. Yeah.
related to
So,
a meeting.
and
So
it's
yeah,
my understanding from the story you've told that those incessant chat comments were deleted, right? And so if they didn't take a
no,
screenshot.
no, 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 they haven't been deleted. I
Oh, they
don't.
weren't deleted. Okay, the people were removed. The five or
Yeah,
six activists just were prevented from making more comments, but their comments are still there in the chat.
yeah. So they could send us the evidence to just show us that
Right.
what they think. I mean, a worry is that like women in many cases are silenced from talking about what we're worried about. So what we're worried about is that if we're being silenced, we'd like to know why. Are we being silenced because they don't want women's human rights campaign to be shared? Or are they, is there lots of evidence that we were actually disrupting the meeting? So we'd like to, that's our issue. So I mean, the outcome at the moment is that they're not responding to us, and we feel that without evidence it's not reasonable to delete us from a platform where we'd like to do lots of networking. Like, there's 25,000 participants who came onto this platform, and they're from all over the world, and they're all concerned about women's human rights. And we think that some of them will be concerned about or there's a possibility that they'll want to know about the problems of redefining the word woman.
Well, and
Uh,
you probably have evidence of that during that 2 week period when those people were coming in and talking with you. I mean, do you feel like you had good conversations and opened some eyes and, you know?
well, yeah. I didn't really. I mean, I didn't. Um, I didn't participate that much, and I had a couple of nice conversations with people. So I don't really know, but I don't think so. I haven't got that much evidence about it, but I do think we should be allowed to participate.
Yeah, for this year that you paid for, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when you spoke, have you brought up the money at all with them? I know you brought it up in media and
yeah. We've asked them to
yeah.
give evidence. Yeah.
So, well, what are the next steps that you're going to take besides just waiting? I mean, it's like you're waiting for them, but it sounds like they might be dragging their feet or ignoring you.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I don't personally think that you can make people do things if they don't want to. If they don't want to respond, I suppose the various different things we could do is publicize it, um, or we could, I suppose, we could try to take them to court for with no evidence, wasting our money. So we could do that in New York if there was a I think that, I mean, in some places it's quite straightforward. You can just ask for your money back at a low level court, to do with financial problems. So I think that we might do that, and ask the CSW to look, this isn't really good enough evidence, and this could be there's, but we might do that. Um, yeah, and I think apart from that, I mean, we will carry on participating at UN meetings, and there are lots of other organizations and wings of the United Nations. So this NGO CSW forum, might be, in our minds, behaving a bit strangely. But the United Nations General Assembly are the top body. So they're the representatives of the member states, and they're the ones who actually make more significant decisions. So we're going to carry on lobbying them, lobbying member states, and also continuing to use the fact that most people, women in the world, believe, and probably men, believe that CEDAW is a good thing, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination of Women. So it's not going to, just because there's one little organization who are sort of behaving strangely, we'll just carry on spreading our message and using the UN is a really great, many bits of the United Nations work have been really great. So we'll carry on, working in relation to that, of the good stuff that the UN have done.
It makes me hopeful about places being open to us having the dialogue, having the conversation, having our thing that we're lobbying for, and not being shut out.
Well, I'm not that. I mean, this event does not make me at all hopeful, because we've been closed down, and it makes me think they will carry on closing us down, which is one of the reasons why we've set up this thing, Feminist Question Time, which is outside the control of other organizations. So basically we run weekly webinars,
Yep.
which spread our message, and a really good way of women talking, sharing information. When we went to the UN meeting, the NGO CSW meeting, it was almost impossible for women to register, and loads of women said they couldn't get onto the meeting. They somehow were denied access. It was very chaotic, because they said it was free to register, but then they closed down the ability of new registrants. So for about a week, or quite a long time, they just said they didn't have space. So they'd paid for 25,000 virtual attendees, and then nobody else could join. And then right at near our event, they allowed a few more to join, but loads of them who tried to join couldn't. So our webinars normally have between 300 and 450 attendees. The UN one that we did had more like 150, and so it's our least successful webinar in terms of reach. But that's because it was on the UN platform, who either are badly organized or didn't want too many people to go. I think it's probably the more badly organized. But so I'm very unpositive. I think that we need to organize outside, organize our own
Outside of the UN, and in which you're doing, but at the same time, the CSW yearly event is not the only place that, I mean, you were saying earlier that the UN offers many, many different organization, or groupings of people and nation states that have meetings, and that you're going to continue lobbying.
Yeah,
And
but Thistle, I think you're getting really that you seem to be misunderstanding what I'm saying. I do not think that lobbying the UN and it is going to. I think that grassroots, individual, like our networking, our women's organizations, are the way for political change. I absolutely do not think. I mean, I answered your question, but I'm not saying that I think lobbying the United Nations is the way forward. It's just a tool
right.
that we're using. So I'm not optimistic about the United Nations,
No,
and
you're
I'm
not. You think eventually you'll be shut out of that arena?
Well, yes and no, but it's just I just think that because you keep on saying, like summarizing what I've said, and it's not exactly what I just said, or it's maybe giving the wrong impression. I think that like the Feminist Question Time that we do, the international networking that we do, which is outside the patriarchal institutions. Like, you've read Mary Daly and you understand probably meta-patriarchal organizing. That's what I think is useful. I don't think so. The UN is a patriarchal body. I'm not optimistic about it. It's patriarchal. There are some good things that they've done, but our struggle, our useful struggle, is going to be in relation to them, but the real work that we're doing, or I believe in doing, is outside it. So I just don't want people to think that I really think that lobbying the UN is going to save us.
Right. Or that um, this effort is not going to be met with them slamming the door in your face eventually at some point. Like getting kicked out on March 26th didn't come as a surprise to you.
No, not at all. Not at
No.
all. No.
Yeah. So, and absolutely, I think the only way to really achieve women's liberation is through organizing our own society that's separate from men's world, and certainly the default setting in all of internationally, all the way down to your local level, the default human that's referred to in society is male. And so
Yeah.
I feel like we have to create our own institutions, our own society where it's matrifocal, focused on the female. And that's a big task, but I think WHRC is, like you're saying with Feminist Question Time, that's about women talking with each other and building a culture and that feeling of solidarity and educating one another and networking. And that's so different than lobbying the UN. But yet you have this document, the declaration, that's a useful document when to the whole world when considering laws and legal, making laws.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. I think that lobbying. I don't think that you're going to lobby. We're going to be massively successful if we were just lobbying on our own. It's only because the belief in women's human rights has developed over the last 60 years that it's a useful method of communication. So it's because it's there and we can communicate with that international belief that we can do it. But I think that women working together, and men can help us as well. I'm not really into this sort of matrifocal thing. I just want not to be oppressed. And so I actually think that you can have also men who can help, and they're people too that I just think we are full human beings and we need rights. And so it's just, I mean, I suppose strategically, I just think at the moment we need to work in women only organizations at times.
Well, it's fantastic what you have done with Feminist Question Time, and what I've done with WLRN. It's like little by little, we keep moving forward. Whether we get to completely reach the entire world on our airwaves as much as we would like or not, we keep moving forward as volunteers. That's the other thing, is like.
Yeah.
The quality of programming that you get on Feminist Question Time it's like the best live radio that I know of. I listen to a lot of NPR and the BBC. I don't know. Do you listen to any news radio at all? No.
I can't listen to it because I just think they're gaslighting us. It's
Yeah.
really hard. I listen to a couple of podcasts every now and then, or but it's just nonsense, most of it. I hate NPR. They're
Okay.
just what they're doing, and the BBC, that what they're doing is just so outrageous.
Yeah.
It's really, I just think that's why I think we should set something up, because then we can just hear proper news.
Right
I mean, I just think it's just so dishonest what they're doing. I just don't trust them.
No,
I mean,
I don't either. I don't either. But
yeah,
I listen because I learn things. It's like it exists, and there are kernels of truth. I mean, the way they get away with lying and creating propaganda is by putting truth in with their propaganda.
yes.
And so I,
Bits of it.
And they do report on day-to-day things that happen too, that are not about like a political agenda. And so sometimes it's informative to listen to NPR but it's all so spun. I totally noticed that, like how, and I feel like a women's community TV channel running 24/7 with our own programming would be such an amazing step forward in feminism, activism.
Then we don't have to watch NPR or whatever, or
Right,
BBC.
right. We
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
have to do that anymore.
I
Yeah,
definitely want to do a gardening program. I'm absolutely into gardening.
you want to
I'll
do a
do that.
gardening program.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you grow both vegetables and herbs, or what do you grow?
I'm mostly concentrating on soil health. So, and drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. So this idea of regenerative horticulture, like just mostly interested in the ecosystem being healthy. So I don't really mind what grows, but I'm mostly into composting and no dig and just making things really, really happy. Lots of biodiversity. So I suppose I would I suppose just sort of making plants happy rather than, so I don't really do very much annual stuff because I tend to prefer like long lived things, and
Mhm.
that would be my
And the
main.
wild, it sounds like
Yeah,
wild plants.
yeah.
Do you go on a lot of walks and meet up with plants that way at all,
Yes.
or
I do a lot of worm composting, so I'm going to talk about that in my radio show.
in your show? Okay.
I'm going to
Very
do
cool.
gardening. Yeah, for me.
Well, this is so great. Thank you so much for gracing WLRN's airwaves, sharing your wisdom and about how you got involved with radical feminism and your ideas for future feminist projects and collaboration. It's thank you, Joe.
Brilliant. Well, it's going to be fantastic. We're going to be 24/7 from
Right.
June.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Well, hello
Okay.
to Turf Island from across the pond. All hail.
Yeah, Andrew, it's really nice talking to you. It's lovely. Brilliant.
Okay.
Look, Thistle, if nobody else wants to do this on the radio show, we can just chat once a week, just have a talk. That will be, we can.
I'd love to, and to
Yes,
live, I would feel safe emotionally doing that. Let me think about
exactly.
that as a
Yeah,
live
yeah,
chat with Jo Brew.
yeah, yeah. I think that's good. I think definitely that should be part of it. Let's think about it and then
Okay.
definitely do it, but we'll just whatever we feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a beautiful afternoon here. I'm
Oh, lucky
excited to
you.
go out and be with the plants and think about the soil. Oh, one
Yeah,
last thing. When you were talking about composting, I went and got
yeah,
some nettle from a nettle
yeah,
patch on that
yeah.
soil. It smelled like
You're
cologne.
right.
It
It's
smelled,
amazing, isn't it? Often the soil around nettles is just amazing. Yeah,
and it was so dark. It
yeah,
was so amazing.
yeah.
So I think that's what we need to do. We need to compost patriarchy.
Yes, brilliant. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, see you then.
Okay,
Fantastic.
bye bye,
Okay,
Joe.
speak to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to my interview with Jo Brew, founding member of the Women's Human Rights Campaign and host of Feminist Question Time, an online live forum that meets every Saturday with panelists and feminists from around the world. I'll drop a link in the description below to help our listeners to find Feminist Question Time online. In other news, WLRN is celebrating our 5-year anniversary on May 6th, 2021. We have ordered special anniversary merch designed by WLRN volunteers Natasha Petrov and Casey Walker to help us celebrate. Please take a look at our anniversary page on our new website, www.womensliberationradionews.com. Just click on the little cake in the upper right-hand corner. Thanks for listening. This is Thistle Pettersen, signing off for now.